Starting a new mimer today. False start. We're starting a new mimer today. V'isha Achas, a mimer the Rebbe said Chav Cheshvan Tafshin Memvav in 1986, the 20th of Cheshvan. That's coming up, and the mimer is based on a mimer of the Alter Rebbe. Just learned that the two versions of the mimer. One of them came from the Wolf family. Sent one of the books of manuscripts of Chassidic discourses to the Rebbe in 1965 with Reb Meni, and the mimer's based on the two different versions, the two different explanations in the Alter Rebbe's mimer, which we'll get to in a moment. So the mimer is on the episode, a famous episode in Tanakh, where a woman comes to Elisha, her husband, who was one of Elisha's students, one of the prophets in training, passed away. And she was left alone, a widow with two children, and they had a lot of bills, a lot of debt, and the creditors were coming, and they were threatening to come take her children and sell them as slaves. That's what they were going to do. So she comes crying to Elisha to help her. Elisha asks her, "What do you have in your house?" The great prophet Elisha. She says, "All I have is a jar of oil. That's it." So he says, "Okay, go out, borrow all the vessels that you can get your hands on from your neighbors. Don't stop with the don't skimp on getting vessels. Get as many as you can and pour from that jar of oil into the vessels." And so that's what she did. They went out, they borrowed borrowed vessels from everywhere, where they filled the house up with vessels, and she started pouring from this small jar of oil into the vessels, and she filled up one vessel after another, until all the vessels were full. She asked her kids, "Are there any more?" And they said, "No, we're out of vessels," and the oil ran out. There was no more oil. Then Elisha said, "Go ahead and sell all this oil. You'll sell the oil, and you'll have enough money to pay your creditors, and you and your children will live on what's left over, on the surplus. What you have left over, you'll live on that." So that's the story in Tanakh about a woman who comes to Elisha. Miraculously, the oil she has fills up all kinds of empty vessels. She puts together a bunch of empty vessels. Miraculously, they're all filled with the oil, and then she has enough not only to pay her bills, but also to live off of into the future. Okay, now we're going to see the mimer. We're going to get started with the Chassidic interpretation of this episode. Okay, so Isha Achas min bnei Hanavim, one woman, who is the wife of one of the Bnei Hanavim, one of the prophets in training, the students of Elisha. Tzakal Elisha, she came crying to Elisha. So there's a well-known discourse by the Alter Rebbe on this verse, and he explains that the Isha hi neshama, the woman that we're referring to, is the soul. Mystically, this is the soul. V'nikra Isha Achas. And the soul is called one woman, not just a woman, but one woman. Isha Achas, one woman. Kihi Achasim Havaya, because the soul is one with God. So when we say the Isha Achas, we're referring to a oneness that the soul experiences with God. Minashei b'nei Hanavim, what does it mean that the soul is from the Nashei b'nei Hanavim, a wife of the children of the students of the prophets? Ki Neviim eloshen nivs v'saim. Neviim, prophets. So the word prophet comes from the term nivs v'saim, the speech of my lips. What does that mean? So it usually means that the prophets speak the words of God. But nivs v'saim, the speech of my lips, means that where else would you have speech? You have speech is in the lips. The mouth is the vessel for speech. You don't have the speech of your arm. It's the speech of the lips, because the lips are a vessel for the speech. So the same idea is that why is the soul called Bnei Nevim, a wife of the Navi? Because it's the because the soul is a receptacle, is a vessel for the word of God. And the soul is this keli, is this vessel to be able to receive and to comprehend the revelation of godliness. So Isha Achas Minashei b'nei Hanavim is a reference to the soul, that is, Achas is one with God. Minashei b'nei Hanavim, it is a vessel to receive the divine energy and to understand godliness. And this soul comes crying to Elisha. Elisha, Asias Ke Elisha HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What does it mean that the soul comes crying to Elisha? Who's Elisha in this mystical interpretation? Elisha is God. As it said, the word Elisha comes from the term Keli Shah, my God turned. So it's a reference to God. This then is the meaning of that this one woman comes crying to Elisha, the soul cries to God. And what does the soul say to God? What is the soul crying to God? That Avdecha Ishi Meis, your servant, my husband, has died. What does it mean, your servant, my husband? So again, we're going to translate this literally. Ishi, which is my husband, is Ishi, is hu Eish Yud. Eish, right? The word Ishi, which means husband, is made up of four letters here. Ishi, my husband. But the word Ish for husband is Aleph Yud Shin. So Aleph Yud Shin is Aleph, Shin is Eish, fire. Yud is a reference to the highest, the essence of the soul. We're going to get to in a moment. And Ishi, this is my husband, my fire. The Eish Yud, the fire of the Yud, which is what? The Ava Kirish Be Eish Etzli Likol Libatel B'Chinas Yud Chach Meila Meis. That the fire of the soul naturally has a fire, a flaming, raging desire and love for God. And what is the fire? The fire is Eish Yud. It's a fire that is yearning to connect to the Yud, to that level of Chachma, the level of godliness, Chachma Ilah, the higher level of Chachma, which is basically means to be completely surrendered and completely nullified within God. That fire that the soul has to be completely nullified within God is mace, it's dead. What does that mean? I don't feel that love right now. So the soul cries out to God, I naturally have a love and a yearning to be connected to you, to expire into you. Ishi, my fire, to be in the Yud, the Eish Yud, that fire is no longer there. The Hanoisha and the creditors, this is again continuation from the verse, that the creditors are coming to take my two children as slaves. What does this mean, that the creditors are coming to take my two children as slaves? Hanoisha, what is the creditor here? The Noisha is Meloshin Ki Nashani Elikim. Noisha has the same root as the word Nashani. It says by Moshe Rabbeinu, Moshe named his oldest son Menashe. Yaakov named his oldest son Yosef named his oldest son Menashe and Ephraim. So the oldest son Menashe is, why did he call him Menashe? So he says, because Kinashani Elikim, that Hashem, that God had me forget my father's home, and my pain and my father's home. So the idea of Menashe, that Nashani means to forget. So the soul is saying that the noisha, the creditor, is causing me to forget. What does that mean? That this is koyal nefesh bahamis shemashkachas eisim elikus. The animal soul, which the godly soul is enclosed in, is a noisha. It causes me to forget godliness. Ushnei yoladai. What are my two sons? So they are hema ava vayira. They are the love and the fear. The love and the awe with which we serve God. My children, my two children, are love and fear. As Tanya says, why the Alter Rebbe explains to Tanya that our emotions are called children because they're born from the intellect. Especially when we're talking about the emotions of the godly soul. The emotions of the godly soul only come from intellect, and so therefore they're called children. And so when the soul says, my children, what are the children of the soul? The children of the soul are its emotions. And what are the two primary emotions? Love and fear. So my two children, my love and my fear, my two primary emotions, are in danger of being taken by the animal soul. Not only is the creditor coming to make me forget godliness, but it actually wants to take that energy that I have and make it a slave. This is what it means that the creditor, my animal soul, is coming to take my two children as slaves, meaning not just that it wants me to forget godliness, to silence the love and awe that I have for God, but to take this love and awe and move it and direct it into foreign passions and desires. In addition to the fact that the animal soul wants me to forget and wants to nullify and stamp out my, God forbid, my love and fear of God, he wants to take the godly soul's emotions and channel them focus them into its own desires, the animal soul's interests. So this is the first half of the story. that the woman comes to Elisha and says that my husband has died and the creditor wants to come take my children, my 2 children as slaves. And we explained it, that the soul that is one with God, cries out to God, saying that my love, my natural love that I have to be completely lost within you is gone. And now my animal soul is trying to take my love and fear that was there, wants to not just to erase it, but to channel it and focus it into its own materialistic desires. So what's the response? So Elisha says to her, what do you have in the house? What does that mean? God says to the soul, what are the faculties, the talents that you still have that the animal soul has not gotten to yet? So the soul answers, the soul answers, your servant has nothing other than a jar of oil. Meaning that I have nothing left. What's the jar of oil? Meaning nothing but the essence of my soul. The essence of the soul is something that can never be tampered with by the forces of unholiness, ungodliness, the animal soul. None of that could ever tamper with the essence of the soul. So the soul is telling God that I'm so ravaged by my animal soul, by my earthly desires and indulgences, that I don't feel anything from my godly soul. All that's left is the essence of the soul. That still remains. That's the jar of oil. The Rebbe adds, you can say that oil is chachma, is wisdom. So what then is the jug of oil? The jar of oil is the level of chachma, the highest level in the soul that the animal soul cannot access, cannot dominate. So this is what the soul says to God. Says, what do you have? And the soul says, all I have is the essence of my soul. That's all that's left. So God then says, or back in the verse, the verse says, "Vayemer leichi shali lach kelim min hachutz." So in the narrative, it's Elisha tells the woman, "Go ahead, borrow vessels from outside. Kelim reikim al tamiti. Don't minimize the amount of empty vessels that you can bring. Don't shortchange yourself. Get as many as you can." So what does this mean? Again, mystically, that God says to the soul, go out and borrow vessels from outside, which means what? You should continue to perform mitzvahs and to study Torah, which are, Torah mitzvahs are the vessels for the divine light. That's why it's called kelim. But we're saying that they're called kelim reikim, empty vessels. Why? Because even though the Torah mitzvahs that the soul is now engaged in are empty vessels, without love and fear. The Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya that when we do a mitzvah, so there's the kavanah, there's the intent that we do with the mitzvah, and the intent is like the light. So the Alter Rebbe likens it to a body and a soul. Right? It says mitzvah. Chazal say mitzvah b'lei kavana keguf b'lei neshama. Doing a mitzvah without intent is like a body without a soul. So the same idea, when we perform a mitzvah or when we study Torah, so we should the normal practice is that it's motivated by love and a fear and an awe of God. I'm motivated, I love God, therefore I want to study His Torah, I want to see what He has to say, or I want to therefore do what He wants me to do, or I have an awe of God, I'm in awe of my relationship with Him, and I don't want to violate it, and therefore I don't violate any of the commandments. So that's love and fear. When a person performs a mitzvah with love and fear, that is a vessel, a body with a soul. When you do it without love and fear, without any motivation, you do it, it's sort of like a hollow act, so then you have an empty vessel. So you have a vessel because you have the act of study or the act of the performance of the mitzvah, but it's empty, it's lacking, it's an empty vessel. So the prophet, or in our narrative, God says to the soul, you don't have any love and fear, do the mitzvah or study the Torah anyway. Empty vessels. Do it empty even without that intent. And don't have less of it. Continue, do more of it. And you will then pour into all these vessels. To draw into them a revelation of the essence of the soul. So what you're going to do is you're going to perform the mitzvah or study the Torah without the motivation, without the love and without the fear. And what's going to happen is you're going to pour from the essence of the soul into it. And as Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya, where he talks, we'll get in a second, Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya that when a person performs mitzvahs or studies Torah, that is dependent on remembering the self-sacrifice that one is willing to have for God. In Tanya, the Alter Rebbe gives us a technique to serving God when we're not feeling like it, when we're not in the mood. And he says, he's talking to the Beinin, and he says that the person has to remember that every single Jew, no matter, regardless of their level of affiliation or observance or enlightenment or knowledge or commitment, every single Jew, when they're pushed against the wall, is willing to sacrifice themselves for God. If they're faced with the choice of denying God, denouncing God, or losing their life, giving their life, they'll give their life. So Alter Rebbe says, so what you have to do is you have to think simply like this. If I'm willing to die for God, so then if I'm willing to die, why am I willing to die for God? Because I don't want to be disconnected from God, or I'm incapable of being disconnected from God. So if I can think to myself that every mitzvah I do either establishes a connection with God, or if I commit a sin, I am severing, God forbid, that relationship with God, that connection with God. So just as we said, I'm willing to die rather than sever my connection with God by denouncing God, right, or by worshiping idols. So then every mitzvah or every sin is a matter of life and death. So if the person can get that into his mind, he can use that technique then to constantly arouse the essence of the soul, right? So you're sort of like you're triggering the essence of the soul. You're like sort of fabricating. It's not really fabricating, but in a sense, you're sort of raising the stakes artificially by viewing every mitzvah and every aveira as a matter of life and death. If you realize it's a matter of life and death, it's a matter, every mitzvah or every aveira is a question of giving your life for God. Since you're willing to give your life for God, so you perform it. So we see that performance of mitzvahs can be done even when it lacks motivation, even when it lacks love and fear, but it could be done by triggering the essence of the soul. So that's what the prophet's saying. This is also, by the way, what the Rebbe explains there about it says that Moshe Rabbeinu and the Jewish people were going to the land of Israel. So Moshe Rabbeinu instructed them to say Shema. So why to say Shema? Because when you say the Shema, when a person says Shema, the intention is that you're willing to give your life for God. But the generation that went into Israel weren't faced with that challenge. That first generation that was going into the land wasn't where they were going to go into the land, they were going to conquer the land miraculously, everything was going to be open to them, there was going to be no persecution, there was going to be no anti-Semitism, they were never going to find themselves in a situation where they'd have to have self-sacrifice. And yet Moshe Rabbeinu tells them, you need to be ready for it, you have to say the Shema. Why? So Alter Rebbe explains this idea, because the willingness to give your life, the readiness to give your life for God is a prerequisite to performing Torah and mitzvahs. So here, the soul is crying out and saying, I don't have love and fear of God. So God says, okay, Kalim Reikim, take out empty vessels. Start serving God hollowly, without the love and fear. But what you're going to do is that performance of mitzvahs, that observance is going to be with the oil that you have left, with the essence of the soul. Right? With this idea that we just explained. Okay. Now, so Kshetasa Kain, if you're going to go ahead and do this, meaning you're going to serve God even though you don't feel like it, even though you're not motivated, you don't feel that love and fear, but you're going to do it. And what's going to get you to do it is that essence of the soul that pushes you to do it. So then, Azai then, Atu v'nayich tichi b'noiser, you and your children will live with the profit, on the surplus. What does that mean? Tichi b'noiser, you live on the extra. The noiser is ki yisrei na'oir abba min ha'cheshach. It's like the light, the greater light that comes from the darkness. So there's light that's light, but there's a greater light, a deeper light, based on the verse of Kelis, there's a deeper light that Yisr Ner Abba Min HaCheshach, the light that comes from darkness is greater than the light without the darkness. What that means we'll get to in a moment. Okay. So that's the explanation. So we have the idea that the neshama cries out to God, says, I don't have love and fear. God says, perform Torah and mitzvahs, Kelim Reikim Al Tamiti, perform your Torah and mitzvahs empty and in a hollow fashion, meaning without the motivation and without the love and the fear, but you're going to be pouring from the oil, it's going to be informed, it's going to be motivated by your essence of your soul. That's what's going to be triggered and accessed when you're performing the mitzvahs. And when you're going to do that, you're going to get to an advantage that you wouldn't have otherwise. When you serve God with love and fear, so that's wonderful. There's a great light. But if you can serve God even when you're not motivated, so then there's a yisrei na'or rabba min ha'chayshech. You're serving God in a place of darkness, and yet you're serving God. And you're accessing the essence of the soul. So that's the surplus that you're going to live by, meaning that there's a surplus, there's an advantage that comes as a result of this. Well, let's leave that for now. Now that Rebbe explains something else. Another explanation from the Alter Rebbe on these words, the person should think deeply and a lot. How he himself is an empty vessel. Without insight, without wisdom in his mind, or without love and fear, or fear and love, and he will then be very bitter and saddened by the distance that he feels from God, and through that, the light of the soul will shine within him. Okay? So the first explanation is that you should perform Torah mitzvahs. What does empty vessels mean? Perform Torah mitzvahs empty, without love and fear, and you're going to pour the oil, the essence of the soul will be what will flow into it. The second explanation is kelim reikim, not that your performance of the Torah mitzvahs are hollow, but that you should think that you're hollow. Think about how distant you are from God. The fact that you have no love and fear, if you can think about that, reflect on that, you'll become very bitter. Recognize that you yourself are empty. And then, when you feel bitter, when you're saddened and you're devastated by that reality, by that awareness, that will then lead to the light of the soul flowing back in. Like the teaching of the Rosh Yeshiva Began Eden. The Rav Mesifta in Gan Eden says a log, the loy salag bein ha'ira, that is not catching fire, so mevatchin leichul, you splinter it. Gufa the loy salag bein ha'ira, the nishmasa mevatchin lei v'salag bein ha'ira. So it says, the Rosh Yeshiva in Shemaim is giving a shir, he's giving a class, and he says how this is relevant up in Shemaim, I don't know. I guess they have their challenges too. But he says that just as you have a log, you're trying to light a fire, but the log is too thick, it's too dense, and because it's so dense, it's not catching fire. So what do? What's the solution? You splinter it. When you splinter it, so now you've weakened it, it's not as dense, and now it'll catch fire. The same thing is true with regard to the soul. That if the soul is not catching fire, it's a sign that it's too dense, meaning it's too full of itself. It's too thick. There's too much self-awareness, and therefore it's not catching fire. What do you have to do? You have to splinter it. You have to break it. So this is the Alter Rebbe employs this actually in Tanya as well, talking about the person who's not motivated by anything he's talking about. He says, if you're not motivated, it means you're totally numb. It's because you're just too full of yourself. So what you need to do is you need to recognize that you're full of yourself, and that you need to get over yourself. And that form of splintering sensitizes you a little bit, and then the light of the soul can take. So if you say to me, furthermore, this light that when a person thinks about that he's an empty vessel, he's splintering himself, he's breaking himself, he's hard on himself, and he's bitter about it, then he can catch fire, he can then be ignited. So this light is yeshla yisrein ala erkam mitzad atzmai. This is a greater light than what we had, than the light that comes on its own. Like the light, the advantage of the light that comes from the darkness. This then, Alter Rebbe explains in the second version, the second interpretation of Ata B'nayich Tichi B'Noisar and Kelim Reik Mal Tamiti, that Ata B'nayich Tichi B'Noisar, you and your children will live off of the interest, off of the surplus, is At Hu Ha'etzem HaNeshama. At you, that's the essence of the soul. Banayich and your children, named Tchilu Rechimu, the fear and love Shebachol Neshama in every soul, is Tichi B'Noisar, you will live off the Noisar, of the extra, which is Noisar, like the word Yisrain, the advantage, the Yisrain, light that comes from the darkness. How are we doing on time? We have, okay, so we'll keep going to chapter 2. So the point is that what emerges here is like this. The Alter Rebbe explains, we already have like a full mimer here that we just learned. We just learned a whole mystical interpretation of a very famous episode in Tanakh, where we're talking about a woman coming and crying to Elisha, and the famous story with the oil and the empty vessels. And here we have a Chassidic interpretation of the story, that the soul cries out to God and says that my love and fear of God is no longer raging. I don't feel it. God says, pour from the essence of the soul into empty vessels. And then you and your children, meaning you and your love and fear of God, will live off of the interest. what does it mean that you should pour from the jar of oil into the empty vessels and you will live off the interest? So two explanations of what that means. The first one is that the empty vessels refers to Torah mitzvahs, that a person should perform Torah mitzvahs even though they're not feeling it. And that's why it's called empty vessels, because the act is not full, is not infused with love and fear. It's not passionate, it's seemingly a hollow act. And when you do that, when you perform Torah mitzvahs, even in a situation where it's hollow, where it's lacking that passion and that drive and that love and fear of God, nevertheless, there's an advantage. There's an advantage that comes as a result of it, because there's an advantage of the light that comes from the darkness. That's one interpretation. Another interpretation is that that a person should think, how do we break this issue? I have an issue that I don't feel anything to God. I'm feeling numb to God. So what God says to the person is, recognize that you're a kli reikon. Recognize that you're empty. Recognize how far you've fallen, how far you've strayed from God. And if you think about that and you recognize how sad of a situation you find yourself in, then you will then be able to live off the benefit. What's going to happen is that'll then lead to the jar of oil, the essence of the soul, flowing into your conscious levels of your soul, and you will then live off of the advantage. So these are two explanations. The Rebbe in chapter 2, which I don't know if we'll get through all of it now, but just to set it up, in chapter 2, the Rebbe is going to explain that there's a difference between these two interpretations. According to the first interpretation, that we're talking about Kelim Reikim, empty vessels, means performance of Torah mitzvahs. So what are we talking about here? That what is the, and that leads to the Yisr Na'or Haba Min HaCheshach, the light that comes from the darkness. What are we talking about here? We're talking about doing Torah mitzvahs, which illuminate the world. We know every act, right? We all know it. This is what we go around saying. Every act of mitzvah and every Torah that you learn brings light into the world. So what are we talking about when we say that you're not feeling anything, you're doing a hollow act? Nevertheless, you're bringing light into a dark place. So there's a dark place, that's you, but you're bringing light into it, the performance of Torah mitzvahs. Now, in order to, and there's a Yisr Na'or Min HaCheshach, because if you want to bring light into a dark place, you need a stronger light than to bring light into an illuminated place. That's the Yisr Na'or Haba Min HaCheshach, that when things are dark outside, and yet you're doing Torah mitzvahs, that's reflective on this strong light that you're accessing to be able to light up that dark place. That's the first explanation. But according to the second explanation, what are we talking about here? The Kelim Reikim. The Kelim Reikim is you. You're thinking about what? That you're a dark place. So we're not talking about bringing any light. We're talking about darkness. It's dark. And you are dark. And by recognizing that you're dark, so here we're not talking about doing something, bringing light into it. We're talking about the darkness that you feel. And what happens when you feel that you're so dark? You're bitter. Meaning that the darkness itself is now going to motivate you and inspire you to come closer to God, which means the darkness itself is shining. So it's not that I'm bringing a light of Torah mitzvahs into a dark place, which is a hollow act. The darkness itself is what's starting to shine. When that darkness itself shines, what happens? Here, there's even a greater light. Because we're not talking about light, we're talking about darkness. And it's a darkness that shines, as we're going to explain in chapter 2, that's even greater. We have time to start it? Yep? Okay. Chapter 2. So v'yesh leimar. So we can say now that the Rebbe takes over. This, what we said till now was basically the Alter Rebbe's Maimer. Now the Rebbe says like this. We could say, the Yisr Na'or Haba Min HaCheshach, this advantage, this light that comes from the darkness, we're all familiar with this term, Yisr Na'or Haba Min HaCheshach. It's a pasuk, and Chassidus obviously talks about this topic all over the place, and there are many different elements and aspects and levels of understanding of this, what exactly this means. So we throw the phrase around, but what does it mean? So generally, it could be divided into two things. There's a Yisr Na'or Haba Min HaCheshach, there's the advantage of the light that comes through the darkness, meaning a greater light that shines through the darkness. Then there's a Yisr Haba Min HaCheshach, that the Cheshach itself shines. And that is greater than even any great light. The darkness is more illuminated than any light. These are basically the two types of explanation that we can give. So here, let's see what the Rebbe says here. You can say that the greater light that comes from the darkness, that stems from the second explanation that we gave in Kelim Reikim Al Tamiti, that a person should think deeply about how they are an empty vessel. So that is so we could say that the light that one reaches based on the second interpretation of the verse. Because obviously when we say it's a second interpretation of the verse, we don't mean that the Alter Rebbe gives us two options. You can either translate it this way or translate it that way. It doesn't mean that there's a conflict. we can dispute how we understand it. It's two levels of understanding. There's one stage, which is Kelim Reikim is Torah and mitzvahs that are hollow, and then there's an even higher level that Kelim Reikim is the person himself. And that's what the Rebbe is saying, that the Yisrin Nar Min HaCheshach, the extra, the surplus that the soul is going to live off of, that comes as a result of thinking about how he's a Kli Reik and he's an empty vessel, that light is a greater light than the light that comes from performing Torah mitzvahs in a hollow fashion. Why? Because when we talk about the advantage of the light that comes from darkness, we have two things. There's the Yisrin Nar B'chtei Lahoyres HaCheshach. There's why we say that there's a greater light that comes from the darkness. So the first explanation is, since it's dark, you need a stronger light to illuminate darkness. You need more light. So that's why, when we're talking about darkness, the light that comes to shine in darkness is a stronger light than light when there is no darkness. So I need a stronger light to illuminate the darkness. In order to illuminate a far away or dark place, you need a very strong light. And this is how it is. When we talk about the advantage, the tichi b'noiser, the living off the surplus that the soul is going to enjoy when it performs Torah mitzvahs without love and fear, this that the person performs Torah, studies Torah and performs mitzvahs, even though he lacks love and fear. How is it, as we explained before from Tanya, how is it that a person can overcome this numbness, the lack of motivation, to nevertheless study Torah and perform mitzvahs, even if he's not feeling it? Where does that come from? It comes from the essence of the soul. Right? Like we said earlier, remember we talked before about arousing sort of that life or death scenario. That the essence of the soul doesn't want to be separated from God. So I'm not feeling anything, and I don't feel... But if I can recognize that this is a matter of connecting or disconnecting from God, so what am I triggering here? What's then motivating me? Not my love and fear of God, I don't feel any love and fear. But that essence of the soul is what's motivating me to perform the mitzvahs. So we see that there's the essence of the soul that is now accessed and triggered in performing Torah mitzvahs. That essence is a greater one than if everything's wonderful and I'm motivated to serve God. When I'm motivated to serve God just by my love and fear, I don't know whether I'm triggering my essence of my soul. But here, when the act is hollow, it's a sign that I'm triggering the essence of the soul. That's what I'm accessing. So that's a Yisrein Ha'oyer Haba Min HaCheshach. That's a greater light. But there's another dimension to this Yisrein Ha'oyer Min HaCheshach, the advantage of the light that comes from darkness. That through being bitter and saddened by the fact that that you're so dark, that you're concealing the light of godliness, so Nimshach Mibchinas Yashas Cheshach Sisrei. From that, we can access not the light, the essence of the soul that is the light that can then shine through our hollow act, but the Yashas Cheshach Sisrei, that Eibush says, the Eibush places he conceals himself in the darkness. Where is the Eibush found? The highest level of God, he's found hidden in the darkness, hiding in the darkness. In the darkness, that's where the highest level of the Eibush is. That's Cheshach Shalamayla Ma'or. Right? There's only so much that God could reveal. And then beyond that revelation is what's hidden in the darkness. So that's the ultimate revelation, as it were. The light that's within the darkness, the light that we can call darkness. That's even greater. This darkness is a level that's even higher than the greatest light. This is then the advantage of the through thinking about how a person is an empty vessel and being bitter by that there's an advantage to that light. When a person performs mitzvahs in a hollow fashion, he's triggering the essence of his soul, meaning he's bringing that light into a dark place. He needs to trigger the essence of the soul, a very strong light, to illuminate darkness. But when a person recognizes that he feels bitter about what's going on with him, what his spiritual status is, how distant he feels from God, and that bitterness is what's serving to motivate him, is bringing him closer to God, that there he's accessing a greater light, even greater than the essence of the soul that's accessed when performing Torah mitzvahs. That's the light, that's darkness. That's the Yisrael Min HaCheshach. So you have one explanation of Yisrael Min HaCheshach is that there's an advantage of the light that illuminates darkness, because you need a stronger light to illuminate darkness. And then there's a second explanation, Yisrael Min HaCheshach, that there's an advantage to the light that is darkness. It comes from the darkness itself. That is a stronger light than even the greatest of lights. But the question then becomes, if that's the case, in both instances we're talking about the essence of the soul being accessed. So how is it different, and how are there two different stages and different aspects of it? That Mr. Shem will continue in chapter 3.